Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast, where we talk to foresters about how they are using digital technologies in their day-to-day forestry work. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast. So today I am joined by Cakey Worthington, who's the Vice President of Carbon Operations, and Zach Pardue, who's the Manager of Forest Information and Geospatial Systems at Anew. How are the two of you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having us on, Kevin.
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So I'm kind of joking because I know you're in the south. We were talking earlier, relatively southern than where I am. So I'm rocking the snowy background, and this might be nightmare for you, I suppose, if you got this much snow in your neck of the woods. And but definitely winter up here, and we're almost into that Christmas mid-Christmas period. So definitely appreciate both of you carving out some time. I know as we talk today, there's a lot happening with you and your company. So definitely busy times, but I appreciate you joining me. So maybe to start off, I'll start with Cakey in terms of maybe looking at your background, environmental sciences studies, and then and there's some forestry master's degree, US South, and I think a stint in San Fran, moved around. But maybe tell our listeners and viewers how you got into that environment and forestry space. Was there like a family tug or just like an outdoors interest ever since you were young? How did you get into the space?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in the Midwest in a very agricultural sort of region where there wasn't as abundant of a forest resource. And I think when I was really little, I enjoyed going to our local parks. And I recall a trip to the Smoky Mountains at one point and just really enjoying the sort of Blue Ridge forested environment. Was always interested in natural sciences and earth sciences. I was the kid turning over rocks looking for bugs and things like that. And when I went to undergrad, I was interested in biology and ecosystems and wildlife and how things grow together in systems. And I ended up getting involved with land conservation and a land trust while I was in school, and then shortly afterwards, really learning about sort of private sector conservation and how funding in the conservation space can really create a lot of conservation outcomes. So when I was working for the land trust in North Carolina, there was a tax credit program that was incentivizing landowners to do no development easements on their forests and their lands. And that kind of drove me into graduate school, where I got a master's in forestry and environmental management at Duke, and was really kind of seeking, how can I do more in the ecosystem service market space? How can I use private sector funding to really, create some huge outcomes for the environment? And that, through learning more about forestry in the forest space and other ecosystem service markets available, I kind of fell into forest carbon. At the time, the compliance market was pretty new from the California compliance space, and the voluntary market for, I would say, modern forest carbon voluntary market, not thinking about Chicago Climate Exchange kind of a previous era, but I would say the one that we see today was really just getting going. And so it's an exciting opportunity to see where there was an opportunity to do a lot of conservation work, because I think a lot of the forest climate and forest carbon space is a sort of a conservation active working forest environment. And so that's how I ended up where I am today. I spent a few years doing carbon project development for the legacy Bluesource company. Then I went to work for a forest landowner, managing carbon on their properties, and now I am where I am today, sort of at the amalgamation of those two, which I'll get into a little bit when I describe our current company.
For sure. And I'm just curious to know, because again, when I looked at your background on LinkedIn, I also noted you're like the captain of an ultimate team. So I think I started panting right away, because I think I've played ultimate once, and I don't think I made it 5 minutes sprinting. So I don't know how you elite athletes are able to run and sprint back and forth all over the place. But hey, I guess I'll be the one eaten by a bear if we're ever in the woods, and you'll probably outrun or outsprint me going forward with your athletic skills there. But
I played in college, but Kevin, I'm an old lady now, and I don't want to blow out my knees because I still have to tromp around in the woods. So I don't play as much as I used to.
Yeah, I hear you. I laugh at that because we all say we're like old now, and yet if you see us on screen, we're like we're not that old, but still some things don't work quite as well as when we're young. So definitely want to get into the Anew side of the business and learn more about that and some of the amalgamations. But I'll maybe jump over to Zach. So Zach, I know you studied forestry and you worked in more traditional space. You worked for RMS, Resource Management Service, at one point. Maybe share with us your journey on how you came to be where you are.
Yeah, so like you said, I started out at Mississippi State University. I got my bachelor's of forestry there, and had a very industrial timber centric education. During my time there, I took the extra effort and I got my GIS certificate because that's always what's kind of been interesting to me. My father, all growing up, he worked in the geospatial space, and so I was always around this, and just that mindset, that thinking really resonates with me. I think of everything in terms of like, where is it? What spatially? Let's look at it on a map. During road trips, I was the kid in the back, like following us on the highways on the paper maps. You ask some people what a paper map is, they might not even know anymore, but that was me. And like most people, what draws you to the forestry space is just that longing to be outside, to be directly interacting with that, and in the case of what we're doing now, also kind of conserve that and turn that into meaningful action. And so, like, I found this little niche at the intersection of this forestry and geospatial, and I've kind of stuck there ever since. I was blessed to have someone kind of take a chance on me. I got my foot in the door with an internship at a timber company here in the U.S. Southeast, and I've kind of gone with it ever since, kind of bouncing from place to place, constantly learning, constantly picking up nuggets of wisdom, and that's where I've kind of come here to Bluesource Sustainable Forestry Company, Anew Climate. I've been at all these industrial timber companies where they've got these really robust, very well-developed systems and processes that drive the companies forward. And that's the kind of the challenge I was presented with is, let's take that and let's apply that to the mission here at Anew, and let's drive some meaningful climate impact. So
Sure.
That's what excites me.
Yeah, very cool. So typically on this podcast, I call people digital foresters, but when I looked at some background materials I prepped, I came across this term. And Cakey, I think you're looking to fill this position, but it was a carbon forester. So now I'm like scratching my head. So I'm going to ask you, Zach, like, are you like a carbon forester now, or are you like a digital forester, or are you a forester, or you're all of the above? It doesn't matter. It's red, pink, blue, purple, whatever it is. You're a forester true to heart. It's just you're still following the basic tenets of sustainable forest management and doing your job as a forester. What are your thoughts on that? How would you describe yourself today?
Kevin, I think that's kind of funny because I would say, like, I think every forester is a carbon forester. Like, it's a part of it. If you're managing the forest correctly, like there's intrinsic carbon benefits. I mean, specifically to like our job posting and everything, we're looking for someone who's very technologically savvy, and they know their way around the current protocols and the different registries and stuff like that. But forestry and carbon forestry are they're one and the same thing.
For sure. I feel like I need to make you a t-shirt that says the digital forester on the front and then carbon forester on the back, or some remnants of that. We'll have some fun with that. So maybe I'll come back to Cakey and ask you, I feel like I gotta get a notepad out, or I'm going to earn my second PhD here as you explain it. But Bluesource, Anew, Element Markets, there's all sorts of other players. Looking at my research, I think 1996 Bluesources, that's when its first transaction took place, and this is just coming from the website. 200 plus projects, $1 billion in capital raised, 170 million tons reduction created. But maybe if you could walk us through what I believe it's called Anew now, and you correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm not using the right terms. But what is the company now, and maybe give us some background in terms of Zach's mentioned the mission, but what is the mission of Anew, and what changes are you trying to affect?
Absolutely, yeah. There's a lot of moving pieces, but it's pretty cool the journey that we've come along. So Legacy Bluesource was a leader in the environmental market space, as you sort of learned about, for 25 years, and where we have really excelled and been a really strong leader in the past 10 to 15 years is in the forestry space and forest carbon markets. We were very early participants in developing projects in the California compliance program and modern day voluntary improved forest management projects for the Northeast in North America. So Bluesource worked with developing projects for a number of landowners for many years. Everything from your timberland investment management organizations, your large industrial timberland owners, family forests, nonprofit groups like the Nature Conservancy and Audubon. We've worked with tribes and tribal corporations, and really throughout that whole process, over many years of developing projects with all these landowners, and seeing the market grow, interest from corporate entities looking to participate in the voluntary market, and seeing that growth over the last few years in particular, I think we saw this opportunity to do more than just help develop projects, but be a landowner ourselves, and really optimize the carbon value on the acre by acre basis. And there's only so much you can do from the developer lens when you're working with other landowners to direct their management directives. And we wanted to kind of be there at the ground. So in September of last year, we raised capital through a partnership with Oak Hill Advisors, around it was $500 million, to start acquiring lands of our own and manage them, with the primary directive of optimizing the climate benefit and carbon value from those forests. So we were with Legacy Bluesource at the time, partnership between them and Oak Hill Advisors, and started acquiring lands for the purpose of carbon management, working forest carbon management projects. And then in spring of this year, in 2022, Bluesource was acquired by TPG Rise, their climate impact fund, and was then at the time merged with Element Markets, who had been acquired by TPG the year prior. So Bluesource and Element Markets became Anew Climate together, bringing together not just the forestry kind of nature-based solutions piece of what Legacy Bluesource did, but a bunch of other environmental market services as well. So pretty much anything in the environmental market space, you name it, they do it, with the idea of being climate as a service. So beyond just developing projects in kind of one niche or helping one space, I think Anew Climate's mission is becoming climate as a service, across all levels of need there, to try and address the real climate problem that we're facing these days. And where we fit into that, we are a subsidiary of Anew Climate, still with our Oak Hill Advisors group, focused on the process of acquiring forests and optimizing our climate impact through our management practices, developing carbon projects as a part of that. And then just this fall, so the latest development in our growth, a few months ago, we, as a part of our land acquisition sort of efforts, we raised some additional capital and purchased the Forestland Group, which is a very well-known timberland investment management organization in the space. The Forestland Group, or TFG, had been around for almost 25 years as well, with the idea of focusing on hardwood timber assets. And traditionally, they had sustainable forest management as their directive, but really with timber as the primary driver of revenue. And this, presents us a great opportunity, because now these lands with a very different investor class focused on climate and kind of environmental outcomes, we're now going to be able to take our new 1.7 million acres of forest land as a part of that acquisition, and be able to add that to our existing portfolio and manage a huge amount of land for climate impact. And when you asked me in the beginning about why I got into this space, I think the private sector conservation space just has a huge opportunity for really massive scale of impact. And this is a great example of how markets directly influence the acquisition that we just made and have allowed us to, I think, make a really huge impact. And we're starting to implement that now through, hopefully be able to talk about some of the systems and technologies that we're using to do that.
Absolutely.
So that was a lot. We're a new climate, we have several partners in that process, and but for our purposes of our conversation and this group today, we're the sort of forest land ownership arm with the idea of managing for carbon.
Yeah, for sure. No, thanks for that overview. And as maybe some might be scratching their heads, if you kind of dial it back and listen to again, it does make sense. There's a couple players that have come together, and it's a serious entity, like with the acquisition last fall, or this fall, I should say. You're one of the top 10 largest US timberland owners, right? And truthfully, I'm not sure what it was, but that press release almost kind of, maybe it was just me up here in Canada, but it seemed like it squeaked across the newswire. Like there wasn't, I caught it on the side and I didn't see as much fanfare, but who knows what it is? Maybe it's a timing thing, but that's a serious move. And to your point, I'm fascinated, having gone through environmental science as well. Never thought I'd be in forestry. Never thought I would see, to your point, that market influence on how powerful it can be, and so I'm fascinated. I'm curious to see how the world unfolds. So I'm going to follow up with that question, the dummies are us question, so everyone knows I'm good at asking the dummies question. But I'm going to ask both of you, and I'll start with Cakey, with you, in terms of the carbon 101. What's the nuts and bolts of, people are listening to this from around the world. Many of them are more that traditional timber harvesting side of things. Obviously, as foresters, as Zach pointed out, we know what carbon is, right? We understand that, the relationship between biomass and volume. But from your seat, if you're talking to someone new to the space, what would be the carbon 101s in terms of maybe addressing some of the myths that people might hear? What are some of the common things you hear, and how would you explain around them?
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of ways you could go there, but I think some of the key topics, especially some of the relevant ones now, are kind of, how are we generating climate impact? How is the carbon offset that we're generating legitimate, and what really even is it? So you're talking about the connection between biomass and carbon, and I think it's a good rule of thumb, about 50% of a tree is carbon. And so we have a lot of trees standing in our existing forests, and we can continue to let them grow, which will sequester more carbon from the atmosphere and get stored in the woody biomass as they grow. When we cut trees that go into long-term wood products, that has additional storage capacity when the wood goes into things like furniture or building construction material, that type of thing. And so the main project type that we focus in is called improved forest management, and it's the idea that we are conserving and additionally sequestering carbon associated with the current stocks of forests that we have, and committing those stocks over a long period of time. So I think a lot of folks struggle with the idea of a conservation credit compared to a removal credit. So people understand the idea, if you let your trees grow bigger, you've sucked carbon from the atmosphere. That's, you're removing the carbon. People understand that concept. I think where it's a little more confusing is the sort of conservation element. So if we don't commit the current carbon stocks we have across the whole property, then if markets change or we are incentivized, because we are a investment organization, incentivized to get the most out of our investment, then we might have an aggressive harvesting scenario. There's plenty of companies out there that is their mission, or their investment directive is to optimize that timber resource. There's plenty of areas that don't have very restrictive laws around what you can harvest, and ownership changes over time. So there's a great case in point is the 1.7 million acres of forest land we just purchased. could have gone to a different landowner with a very different directive. And what enrolling in these carbon projects ensures is that over the project lifetime, which is intended to be, a certain level of permanence, the number of years of which depends on which protocol you participate in, but it's meant to be, what's considered permanent from like a carbon cycle perspective for natural resources. It ensures that those carbon stocks stay where they were. And that's a piece that I think is commonly misunderstood, but is something that, those deep in the timber industry know when prices increase on specialty products, people can sure get in there and cut wood. And land use change is also a huge pressure in certain regions. And, the carbon that's standing today is definitely not guaranteed by any measure. So what we're doing is helping ensure that. And through our sustainable forestry practices, we still plan to, enhance the ecological value of our forests, do salvage logging where it's necessary for ecosystem health. And in some cases where there's niche markets, do some harvesting, but we intend to let our carbon stocks grow over time on our total ownership. And so we're going to have, a little bit of change of practice on some of the lands we purchase, as well as, a huge kind of conservation aspect, which is different than preservation because we're still out there working the woods. But that's kind of the direction we're going with our forest carbon work.
For sure. Very cool. And that's a great clarification that it's not like you acquired the lands and then just kind of set them and forget them, like they're being managed and optimized, if that's the right word. But I also love the distinction you've made between preservation and conservation, because I think back to my undergrad envirosci class, and I can't remember the professor's name, but it was beaten into us that they are different. They're not one and the same. And we have to tread carefully when we use those terms, and maybe those get blurred.
Yeah, and both are important, right? They're all pieces of this big puzzle, and that's how we kind of fit into it.
Absolutely. So Zach, I'm going to turn that question to you as well, from again, coming from more that traditional timber space. And if you're to bump into some of your forestry buddies, at a pizza bar, maybe late at night with a cold one in hand, I'm winking. How would you describe the work you're doing in carbon now, the carbon 101 spiel you'd give to your buds?
Kevin, it's like you're almost there with me at that late night pizza bar. Well, I would say, leaning on my prior experiences, I know better than anyone about, when you purchase a piece of property and what can happen to any individual set of trees. We purchase that in a traditional timber management space. We're going to optimize that for as much revenue as we can pull off of that, and everything else is just it's kind of a background. Like there's ecosystem services, there's wildlife, there's all these other things that are tied in implicitly, but that timber forward strategy is what's guiding the whole ship forward. And where we're different is that we're giving carbon a seat at the table. And actually, I'll even add to that, like carbon is at the head of our table and driving everything that we do. That's not to say that we aren't looking at all those other revenues in addition to that, but we keep that forward in what we do. And what's cool and what interests me is that line of thinking is represented even down to the systems that we build out. We've got the very unique challenge of, yes, we've got to keep up with these carbon inventories to run the program and know how many credits we're generating. We also need to keep up with a pretty robust merchantable timber inventory, just so we can make those spot management decisions. And in addition to that, we also want to keep up with all the tons of other ancillary data so that we can keep up with our miles of streams. Let's keep up with just everything, all of our high conservation value forests. We want to know where every single endangered animal out there is. All of those things we want to keep up with and bake that into our systems and what we do.
Yeah, very cool. And so it's almost like we're the three of us were kind of lining each other up for the next segment of the conversation. So perfectly, and that's unintentional, by the way, for our listeners and viewers completely. This is all unscripted as the norm for the Digital Forester podcast. But you mentioned systems, and even when I look at like your website and the project map, like I was kind of, well, I literally said like, holy bleep, that was me doing it. But like there's a lot of projects you guys have, and I know you're representing the forestry side or the forest land side of it for this call, but there's a lot of at play there. So when you talk about systems, Zach, maybe describe to us what that means for Anew. Is this homegrown tech? Is this some COTS? Is this a mix? Is there some legacy? Is there some AI? Is there some chat GPT new stuff? We can just tell it, it's like, where should I put my dollars for carbon? And then it'll come back. The AI will tell us exactly what to do. But maybe talk to us about the technologies that you're currently using, because also Cakey mentioned the verification component, right? We know there's a hot space with climate tech with, I don't even know what next satellite is going up there that's remote sensing methane, or like the hyper spectral of this and that. Like it's all over the place. It's exciting, but it's kind of crazy at the same time. But maybe share with us or share with me some of your thoughts around where the technology is, what technology you're using today.
And this is, you're going to have me nerd out for an hour if you get me too far off on this. This is what's so exciting, is like we're a startup through and through. So we've kind of started with like almost a year ago now with an absolutely blank slate of how we want to build and tailor our systems precisely to what our mission is. And using that blank slate, we've developed the strategy of, we don't want a system that tries to do everything. We would like a la carte options, and we want to pick the individual systems that best meet the specific needs that they're made to do. We what do they say, like jack of all trades, master of none. We want to pick like a patchwork of the best systems that do their jobs first, and then two, communicate and talk well together. So we could get into it, but we want to make sure that our accounting system is talking to all of our FIS GIS systems, which are are communicating with our transactions, acquisition, disposition databases, the whole 9 yards. They need to be an interconnected ecosystem of data talking back and forth seamlessly.
Right.
And where that becomes kind of even more interesting, Kevin, is then how that connects to the systems that the carbon development team with Anew, who's developing our carbon projects, is doing. So we kind of have two different companies with two different systems that get put up, and they need to talk to each other too, so that we can maintain the best records possible and make the best decisions on the ground. But the same data sets flow through both of our practices. So as Zach mentioned, we are a bit of a startup within our business unit, and we've been using the technological advances that the Anew climate team has put together as well, because that's another kind of key communication point for us.
Yeah, for sure. And definitely no issues with nerding out or geeking out on this podcast. It's welcome, since we know there's many who are listening, watching that are in that camp and proudly wear that badge. But before I maybe come back and drill down a bit more on the technology side, Cakey, with your seat as the VP of carbon operations, and as you mentioned, like the Anew side having some tech, you guys in startup mode doing stuff, and it's cool to hear, because obviously you're fearless. You're not worried about you're looking for the best technology that can get the job done while working harmoniously together. But in your seat of VP, I'm curious to know, like the Zachs of the world are always going to come and say, I want more, Cakey, I got to buy this, I got to do this. I'm assuming, again, knowing Zach, right, we got all these tools, but you're in that seat where you have to make that decision and balance it against, I suspect, multiple different moving parts. How do you do that? I'm curious. I suspect our listeners and viewers are probably also curious to know maybe how the brain of a VP works and some of that decision making with so much uncertainty and so many different driving factors. Can you share maybe your thought process and how you decide how to move forward on different technology for your company?
Sure. And I mean, we went through a pretty robust strategic review process just in the beginning of our organization. For a while it was just me on the operations side and trying to figure out what kind of systems do we need to set up? What do we, does it need to be this jack of all trades system? Can we have different systems that work together? And, some of the things I think were guiding my thought process at the time were, what are the problems we're trying to solve? There's so many cool technologies out there, and not all of them necessarily are useful for us. And while they might be useful for other folks in the forestry space, they don't necessarily solve the problems we have. So, that's just generally the mindset of what is it we need to tackle? What does the ideal system look like? If I could create one from scratch, what would all the features of that be? And then go through the process of surveying what's out there and figuring out, do the current systems in the marketplace address those issues? Do we need to do some innovation on our end? Do we need to partnership with somebody who might be able to kind of meet us halfway with the ideas that we need? And I think we are definitely, for the forestry space, our needs are very different, where I think we present definitely an evolution on the data management needs of a traditional forest land owner. And so our thought process was, what systems need to talk together? What is the outcome we need? And how can we do that in an efficient way? The new technologies can be cool, but also very cost expensive. So the kind of flip side of that with the startup company is, especially before we acquired very much land, having to pitch to, we need a forest information system to manage our data, or we need something beyond just a couple shape files to manage our geospatial information. Making the pitch for that next level when you maybe haven't grown into it yet, and being able to see, we went from 1 to 10, now we're going from 10 to 100, and creating the appropriate technologies for the scale that you're at, I think is those are a number of things that were kind of floating around in my mind. But it's definitely been a collaborative process. I have leaned on experts, whether that's third-party consultant groups or hiring people like Zach, who know not more in the weeds than I do. I know enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be an expert, at least down in like the technological weeds of things. So
sure.
That's kind of some of my where we went with all of that, and it's still in the works, really.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing. It's good. It's fantastic to hear, because I love how right when you started off, it was about the how, or it's not the how, sorry, the what are we trying to achieve? And too often people drill to the how right away and maybe get lost in the weeds too soon. So that's super cool. So Zach, from your seat, thinking of the technology side of things, Cakey mentioned the shape files, some old constructs, if we call it that. Coming into this space, did Cakey just say, here's Zach, here's my wallet, here's the corporate credit card, just go ahead and buy whatever you want? What are those differences between where you came from, the traditional timber company, to Anew, Bluesource? See, I even get tongue tied with which one, the legacy Blues, Anew. I'm just going to say Anew. Perfect. There we go. It only took how many hours for me to get to that point, right? Absolutely. But thinking of your journey at Anew, Zach, like what was the biggest surprise as it pertains to technology that or caught you off guard, in terms of, is it as how fast Anew as a startup moved and your ability to proceed forward with the use of technology, or was it something else?
I would say the biggest difference, looking back and looking forward, is definitely pace of play. We are sprinting forward, we are moving fast, and constantly moving forward. When we need to make a decision, obviously we want to get the best heads together and talk it out, analyze a problem, come up with a solution. But we don't want to committee something to death. We don't want to talk it to death, analyze it to death. We're going to come up on a solution, and we're going to attack it. Midway through achieving that goal, we may try and reanalyze if we're even headed in the right direction, make some course corrections from there, but constantly moving forward. That's what we're aiming to do.
Very cool. Very cool. So thinking of the technology side, I'm going to guess, obviously you use GIS, you've talked about some financial systems and other things, but what would be the piece of technology that surprised you the most? Is there one, I suppose, because nowadays, we got that, and I'm kind of poking at you on the nerd side here. We got buzzwords around digital twins, we've got AI, we've got, backpack lidar, we've got an Earth observation space exploding. Maxar went private. I think a private equity acquired Maxar, so that was a big play on that front. But from the technology side, what is maybe that piece of technology that gets your nerd on thinking beyond what you're implementing now? Because I suspect Anew's probably not that different than some of the other companies in terms of some of the basic technologies around GIS and what they're using, whether it's Esri technology or whatever. But is there something special, I guess, in the secret sauce? Whether it's a cloud, on-prem, new technology developed from the higher up part of the company or other business units. Is there something that gets you excited, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask in the carbon space and conservation and forest management side of things on the technology front?
Well, I'll say it. You mentioned on-prem versus cloud. We're a fully remote company. Prior to this acquisition, we had 8 employees in 8 different places.
Wow.
There is no prem. So whatever strategies we come up with have to absolutely be cloud-based and distributed and work well. The other thing, speaking of like technologies that really excite me, our company, as a whole, our business unit, we're putting a ton of weight into remote sensing, and just remote sensing applications of all forms. We've been hiring aggressively on some of our sister business units, and we're building a very strong dugout of employees who can do some really impressive stuff with remote sensing, because you got to think of the scale we're operating. We've got 1.8 million acres. We're definitely a forester's first company where boots on the ground are very hard to match, but we can't get boots on every piece of ground all the time. So how can we gain efficiencies from looking at things from above? How can we use automation and drones to help aid us with our management decisions? Things like that.
So with some of the work you're doing, is it mostly drone based, or would you say you're full spaceborne as well in that space, that Earth observation space? Is there a split in terms of how you're leveraging those technologies?
Yes, a split. We're trending more towards space based and increasingly more on demand imagery. However, we're trying to dabble in the drones. The thing that comes with that is, by the time you've got someone out there with a drone to look at your property, you've got someone on the property, and sometimes it's good to have that drone up above, and maybe also get those boots on the ground underneath the canopy as well. And that's why we're very excited about some of our partnerships and collaborations with other people in the space who can help really bring insights.
I think what's exciting for us too about our remote sensing applications is just the number of ways it can help our business. So we use remote sensing to help us with forest stratification, to better allocate carbon stocks on different, on an acre by acre basis, rather than just using sort of historically operational blocks where, in between these 2 roads, you've got this section of forest, and a forest manager might have called it northern hardwoods, but we have the ability to use our remote sensing technology with ground truthing on our inventory information, on our on the ground plots, to say, on an acre by acre basis, we can have a much better sense, and it doesn't necessarily have to line up with those operational blocks. So we can have a much more accurate look at what the forest typing is across these, pretty massive amounts of land. Another application is, from an operations perspective, we own a lot of acres. It's hard to get boots on the ground everywhere. We can see land use change. We can use it for timber security to see if there's been conversion of forests, even at a really small level. We can track for natural disaster and climate resilience over time. So there's just a lot of applications for the operational side of the business beyond just quantifying and measuring carbon, that I think this sort of same spatial layer can be applied in so many different ways that we're trying to utilize.
Yeah, very, very cool. Definitely. Yeah, I can already visualize some of the things you guys are doing, and that's super cool. So you mentioned resiliency, and so thinking of obviously playing in the climate space, if we think of California, where you're at one point, right, the wildfires, you think of the south there. I think that was pretty late in the season for that hurricane to rip through, or again, was it weather or was it climate? Nonetheless, it was later in the season, so we don't need to go down to the semantics of that debate there. But how does that factor into how you use technology in your planning and management? Like with all this, like I feel like in your space, there's so much uncertainty. There's so many balls in the air, shiny ones, some not so shiny that you got to juggle and balance. How does technology help you do that? Is there a certain type, or is this just more back to, as you mentioned, intelligent, smart people doing what humans do to issue, process, and figure out the best path forward and course correcting? Is there a secret thing to how you guys are leveraging technology to realize the success you've had?
Well, I'll let Zach speak to the technology piece, but I think, just for us as our management strategy, a huge piece of how we are managing for climate resilience is the sort of original technology, which is our trees. Having mixed species, hardwood forests, naturally occurring where they are, presents a ton of resilience. So we have this. A great example of that is, you mentioned the hurricane. We had a Hurricane Matthew in 2018 came through the area where our current Florida property ownership is, and a lot of the pine plantations in that area just got completely wrecked. If you look at it in satellite imagery, it was brutal, and I think the timber industry really suffered in that area. In the same way that a lot of fire-prone regions do when those natural disasters come through. But if you go, it's now 4 years later. If you look at our bottomland hardwoods of our big cypress and tupelo trees, they're doing just fine. Snap top, that's fine. It grows back. You don't see the wind throw. You don't see there's just a lot of resilience in the sort of the true technology of just the earth doing its thing, that as much technology as we can apply to our management, I think the trees themselves also do a huge work in that front. So I just have to give a shout out to those natural hardwood forests, and then Zach, you can talk about what we're doing to help increase that further.
Well, yeah, that's funny. I love talking about that hurricane because it's right here in my backyard here in Panama City, Florida. And you said it exactly, Cakey. Driving through these uplands and these historical pine plantations and everything, everything looks normal if you just tilt your head 45 degrees because all the trees are leaned over. And then you get down into our hardwood forest there along the river, and it's just it looks almost untouched. It wasn't, but it's just bounced back so hard, such resiliency there. To your earlier question about technology, though, I think what really makes the secret sauce here at Anew is, technology is great, and there's going to be something that's constantly, there's always going to be something new and shiny. What really sets us apart is just an extremely, extremely knowledgeable team and the brains behind the computer. The people sitting there making the clicks and making those decisions is what really sets us apart. Oftentimes with a lot of these new technologies, you can almost you can have too much information. Is that a weird thing? Like as a data guy, that it seems weird to almost say, but like you can drown in the data lake, right?
Yeah.
And so being able to sift through that and pick out the pieces of technology and give the information that is going to be pertinent and putting it to the right use, picking out the right stuff. That's where the difference really is.
Yeah, I think the sophisticated data management piece is where our technology, I think, is going to become the biggest, most effective. We're taking spatial data, we're taking carbon inventory data, which is sort of continuous forest inventory, remeasured same data over time. And then you have sort of merchantable timber data around, different strata and what assets you might have for different products. And being able to get those all to communicate so that we can optimize that decision on a per acre basis, it's a real challenge because, as Zach said, there's a lot of information. It's hard to overlay it all and connect it all because there's financial information, what markets are doing well. There's biometric information, how much carbon or how much saw timber you might have in a given spot. And then there's the geospatial component of like, where is it on the ground? So we're trying to put all these pieces together and optimize it, right? And be able to to your point earlier, Kevin, of like, I wish I could just ask my AI tool, hey, where should we harvest these trees or where should we not harvest? And it's not so simple as that. So I think that's our real challenge, but also our biggest opportunity, that those are the types of tools, a little bit of proprietary of like putting in pieces of different, getting our FIS system to communicate with our geospatial system and overlaying that with all those different data sets to be able to get something that really optimizes our investment, but also optimizes the climate outcome.
For sure. And I was gonna ask a question of the Chat GPT about Bluesource, but I was kind of afraid to see what it would spit out, and it would probably take us down a different rabbit hole. But very cool. So definitely love the thinking there and love the story. I'm curious to know. Maybe I'll start with Zach on this one. From a technology point of view, we've danced around a couple of things, and we'll let our listeners and viewers connect the dots in terms of what some of the things you guys are doing behind the scenes. But what are the pieces of technology maybe in the next 1 to 3 year time frame that gets you excited, or beyond gets you excited, gets you really, really excited? That's my challenge, to pull the nerd out of Zach there. But what's that? Is there a piece of technology, or do you think it's more about, what we've just talked about? It's more about data being the new oil and finding a way to really mine that data more than we currently are. Because I think there's a statistic out there, this goes back a couple of years, that only like 4% of the data is actually, really leveraged. The rest is just sitting there in a big data lake and floating around doing its la thing. But from a 1 to 3 timeline, Zach, which pieces of technology would you describe that gets you really excited?
In that near time frame, I feel like there's a lot of gains in the AI space. I feel like we're really getting to like buzzwordy territory here, but like truthfully at its core, I think AI truly hasn't hit forestry, all aspects of forestry quite yet. And I think once it makes that connection, the gains for our company and a lot of companies in the space are going to be immense, because that enables you to wade through the mess and help turn data into information into action. In the little more long term, I feel like there's a lot more development that needs to go into it. I think some of our drone and remote sensing technologies are, they're going to blow up. And when they blow up, it's going to allow our foresters to just cover even more ground and be in more places at once.
For sure. Are you suggesting that maybe there's a new space company that might come about? I tried to crack a joke and be funny. I got some laughs there. I'm just joking for our listeners, by the way. I was trying to play off the Anew climate versus Anew space, and probably no one's laughing.
We've been dropping Anew puns for since the company was initiated.
So. Yeah, there you go. And so maybe Cakey, on your side, thinking of less the technology side and that carbon space, and again, as VP of carbon operations there, are there certain things that you would say gets you really excited in that short term, near term, I should say, 1 to 3, and then maybe beyond that? Are there certain things you're keeping your eye on from a strategic point of view as VP?
Yeah, I mean, I think my answer is definitely more boring, as I'm not into like what's the hot new tech. I think for me, it's around really, like we mentioned before, kind of leveraging the data that we have to make the best management decisions. Because I think a lot of that data is being collected. It's just a matter of putting it together in such a way where we can really make the most informed decisions. It feels like every time I want to go and make a decision on, my regional director comes to me to say, should we do this harvest? Is that going to be the best for our management? We have all the data there. It's just not been all put together yet. So in our real short term, it's developing a pretty slick optimization tool to be able to layer all those components together. And I think for me, the technology that excites me most is that, the new folks coming into the space, everyone knows how to code and make things a lot more efficient. It used to take us, like 3 weeks using the solver tool in Excel to optimize our baseline model for carbon. And now our Anew's climate carbon team has developed a pretty sophisticated code base that allows them to run model scenarios within a number of hours. And the amount of accuracy that you can get to a model by being able to run it in that that quickly as compared to taking shutting down your computer for a day or something like that. I think that being able to leverage that data more through developing code to kind of do the hard stuff for us, I think is critical. You'll get me on my soapbox about like there's a tech industry right now, and I think in 20 years it won't be so much tech. Like, what is tech? There's so many different things that are part of tech. Everybody's going to be using tech, and I think that that general concept that we can apply those technologies across everything we do, I think is what excites me in general. But that's a more boring answer.
Yeah, no, that's great. It actually raises an interesting question, a follow-on question, because you touched on the people side and maybe the generational side of a forester that I might have known 20 years ago would not be writing code. And Zach even said at the start, he was a forester, he wants to be outside. Often we hear foresters say, it's like, I didn't go to school to sit behind a desk. I went to forestry school to be outside and make a change, make an impact. But to your point, the reality is that students, like people coming out, it's you just know how to code by default. Like even my kids, right, they're coding now and they're in grade 6, and it's not because it's a homework assignment, it's just they want their Roblox or Minecraft or whatever it is they play. I don't even know, I'm dating myself now, but they want to automate that in their game, right?
I think Minecraft has come back around, Kevin. I think that's
I know, I hear you on that one. Yeah, for sure. But I'm curious in terms of like your scale up, you said you're 8 and then now you're going to 100, which is crazy. And it's comes with now you're gonna have an HR person probably to handle all the people there. But are you to riff off of that comment around people and the skill set? We've had other podcasts where people have said it's hard to find the right people for even the boots on the ground, let alone boots on the ground with coding skills. Are they unicorns? I don't know. But what are you two seeing in terms of the landscape? Are you finding the right people coming out of forestry school? Are they really the jack of all trades that Zach was talking about earlier, that they're just unique people that you're lucky and find them? Is there a people problem? Maybe problem's not the right people challenge or talent shortage, or what are your thoughts on that, Cakey? And then I'll go to Zach.
I definitely think there's challenges. I think, students coming out of graduate school are learning way more about carbon and environmental markets than when I was in school, even though that wasn't, too long ago. But those folks need to be trained up. And the thing about forest management and forestry is that even if we get as high tech as we possibly can, you cannot manage a forest successfully without understanding what it's actually like on the ground. And we absolutely are we've acquired employees who are maybe more of the like older sort of cohort, and I think there's an opportunity to upskill folks into new technologies, but the sort of boots on the ground knowledge is irreplaceable in our industry, and having a team of staff members who have some of that experience, and that can look like a lot of different things, but that's kind of irreplaceable. So while there's a lot of folks, kind of coming out fresh out of school, nothing can quite replace understanding what it's like to know the woods as they work. And especially with hardwoods, those are slow growers, and the cycle is a longer period of time. And so you could look at a forest and 10 years later, look at our hardwood forest, and it may not look too much different if you're just driving by, but understanding the processes that happen there and the impact that different silvicultural techniques, it takes a long time. So there's definitely a balance. We certainly we're proud of a few particular unicorns on our staff, on our modeling team, and people just really know how to like put a lot of that stuff together. Those folks who are hard to find, we hope they find their way over to Anew. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for all different sorts of skill sets. So I think we're growing to a phase where we can kind of use those different skill sets and piece together where we get it all at the same place. But it's something I continue to think about. what type of, gaps do we have and what needs do we need to fill there.
For sure, for sure. And Zach, what about yourself? Thinking of being switching over to Anew, and then as a carbon forester, looking for other carbon foresters or foresters in general. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you find that there's a shortage of people, or do you reiterate what Cakey touched on, that it's just tapping into the right people and bringing them in?
Yes. Is there a problem with with good candidates and employees? I would suggest that there's, we don't have an employee problem. We've got like a mentorship problem. And let's instead of looking for unicorns, let's look for the people who are, in a position and in a place where they're ready to learn and grow. And let's put those people, you said it, Cakey. Here on our team, we've got tons of institutional knowledge, historical knowledge of our land base. Let's put those people together and grow the candidates. Let's grow the people we want on our team.
For sure, for sure. Very good point. So as we look to wind down, final questions to each of you. I'll start with Zach and then come back to Cakey. Zach, if you were to look back on your younger days, as you're training as a more traditional forester, going into those timber companies, if you're to look back, what would be that one pearl of wisdom? You talk about mentorship. How would you mentor as younger Zach if you were to impart one thing to that version of you? Is there something?
I would probably just suggest listen more, talk less, ask plenty of questions, and be a sponge.
Love it.
Always
Excellent.
Be willing to learn. Always
For
be
sure.
willing to learn.
Be a lifelong learner, for sure. And Cakey, how about yourself?
It's hard to argue with great advice like that, from Zach. I think something I did a lot when I was young, and I still do, is just ask a ton of questions. When we work in all different regions of the country, silviculture and forest management practices are very different across there. So just taking every opportunity I can get to ask questions, I feel like is, that's something I'd continue to encourage everyone to do, no matter whether you're young or old. I also think just, continuous self-reflection. I think it's easy for us to feel like we know a lot. When you get to a certain level in your career, you can feel like you're an expert in something. And I try never to feel too much like I'm an expert on anything, and just try to constantly reflect, where do I have gaps in my knowledge? Are there things that I could learn more about? Even if it's not something I particularly enjoy learning about. I thought about that when I went to grad school. Like, didn't have much of a finance background, so I tried to get more of that, even though it wasn't, I enjoyed nature more. So, just always trying to self-reflect and look for constant improvement, no matter where you are in your career.
For sure. Great two pieces of advice or thoughts there. So, hey, so if folks want to get a hold of you to follow up on anything we've talked about on this podcast, Cakey, Zach, what's the best way? Is it a website? Is it LinkedIn? Is there an email you want to share, or what's the best way to grab a hold of you, Cakey?
You can definitely find me and our organization on LinkedIn. You can definitely find us on our company website, anewclimate.com. If you've got burning questions, reach us at either of those places and we should be available.
Awesome. Good stuff. Well, hey, I want to thank both of you so much for joining. I actually learned, I was being the sponge. I love doing these podcasts because I'm the sponge, kind of just soaking in. I love learning about the story. I love, hearing that continued startup mode that you all are blazing the trail forward with. It's super cool. Looking forward to seeing where you all go. But definitely thanks for your time, and looking forward to speaking or seeing you in person in the not so distant future. So thanks very much for your time.
Thanks so much, Kevin.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Stay warm, Kevin.
Will do.